23 stab wounds. Not in battle, not at the edge of some barbarian frontier, but beneath the marble arches of Rome itself. Julius Caesar, the architect of an empire, bleeds out not from the blade of an enemy general, but from the daggers of his closest allies. Among them stands Marcus Junius Brutus, his voice still warm with friendship, his hands now wet with blood, a man Caesar called son, friend, heir in spirit. The betrayal transcends the personal, cracking the very foundation of a republic already trembling at its core. As Caesar's blood seeps between the white marble tiles, the question echoes through history. How does devoted friendship curdle into calculated murder? What transforms a patriot into an assassin, driving him to plunge cold steel into the heart of the man who reshaped the world? And most hauntingly, what happens when the fear of power becomes more terrifying than tyranny itself? This is not merely the chronicle of an assassination. It is the shattering of sacred trust, the culmination of naked ambition, the final, labored heartbeat of the Roman Republic as it gasps toward empire. Rome is a furnace in March. The cobbled streets singe through sandal leather, the city air thick with tension and sweat, palaces whispering with shadows of conspiracy. Senators clasp hands with smiles that never reach their eyes, gazes calculating distances to daggers. Laurel wreaths adorn plotting heads, concealing ambitions beneath symbols of honor. The Republic gasps its dying breath, its death rattle audible in every forum debate. Julius Caesar walks the Via Sacra with the measured stride of inevitability, no longer merely human, but transfigured into living legend. His skin weathered by Gallic campaigns, his crimson robes crackling with palpable authority. Victory clings to him like armor, growing heavier, more constraining with each passing day. Where temples once honored gods alone, his marble likeness now stands among deities. The plebeians call his name not with respect due a general, but with the fervor reserved for saviors, for kings. Behind marble columns, Brutus counts every cheer, every bent knee, every abandoned tradition, his stomach tightening with each one. For Brutus was forged in the unforgiving flame of republican virtue, his bloodline traced to the man who expelled the last king from Rome. In his ears still rings the iron conviction of his mother, Servilia, Caesar's most passionate lover, yet Rome's most devoted daughter, who whispered to him since childhood that their beloved republic was not a birthright to inherit, but a sacred trust to defend, even against those we would die to protect, even against those we love beyond reason. Brutus sharpens his resolve in silence, though not in secret. He watches Caesar in the Senate chamber, where his voice thunders across the marble hall, not proposing laws, but dictating them, not requesting power, but seizing it. Senators no longer debate, they merely applaud. Each proclamation winds tighter around the throat of a republic Brutus has sworn with his blood to defend. What twists the knife deeper is how Caesar still looks at him, not with the calculated gaze of a politician, but with genuine affection that radiates warmth across the chamber, a paternal pride that makes Brutus's hand tremble. In hushed conversations, Caesar offers him governorships, consulships, whispers of succession, a future where they might rule as father and son in all but name. He cannot see, or refuses to see, the fracture forming in the man he trusts most. This blindness is Caesar's fatal flaw, his belief that loyalty, once given, remains unbreakable regardless of circumstance. Brutus tests each potential conspirator personally, looking into their eyes as they swear their oaths, repeating sacred vows until the words scorch their tongues raw. They gather in shadowed gardens and torch-lit corridors, beneath ancient frescoes depicting the expulsion of Rome's last king. These painted ancestors seeming to judge their descendants with silent approval. Cassius circles these meetings like a predatory bird, lean and hungry, whispering venom that crystallizes Brutus's doubts into certainty. When he finally grips Brutus's arm, his fingers digging into flesh, and demands, is Rome not worth more than one man's ambition, however great that man may be? Brutus does not speak. His silence hangs in the air like an unsheathed blade, and the mechanism of history begins to turn on blood-rusted hinges. March 15th dawns with claws of cold threading through the morning mist, a deceptive chill before the blood heat of betrayal. The Ides settle over Rome like an ill omen ripped from Sibylline prophecies, yet Caesar wakes untroubled, brushing aside the desperate warnings of trembling haruspices and his wife Calpurnia's tear-stained premonitions. He wraps himself in the certainty of his own legend, each victory a stone in the wall of his perceived immortality. Outside, the city pulses with unusual stillness, a held breath before calamity. Inside the theater of Pompeii, conspirators arrange themselves with practiced casualness, their togas concealing not just daggers, but hearts hammering against ribs, throats constricting with the magnitude of what comes next. Brutus moves through the chamber like a man already half-ghost, his body following a terrible momentum his soul fights to resist with each step. When his eyes meet Cassius's fevered gaze, he sees not patriotism, but raw hunger, hands already twitching in anticipation of violence. Then Caesar arrives, attendants falling away like leaves, his presence filling the chamber, commanding genuflection, his purple hem sweeping stone floors where soon his blood will pool. As senators offer hollow greetings, Brutus feels each heartbeat like a hammer strike against his chest. In this moment between intention and action, he realizes the republic and tyranny have become indistinguishable, that perhaps they always were. The first conspirator approaches Caesar with a petition, and history contracts to the width of a blade's edge. The petition is a ruse. As Caesar begins to dismiss it, Simba seizes his toga as the signal, yanking the purple cloth from his shoulders with trembling hands. Chaos erupts in a single heartbeat. Casca strikes first, his dagger clumsy with nerves, slicing Caesar's neck but not deep enough for mercy. Caesar turns, his expression not fear but utter bewilderment, his mouth forming words that history will never record. Blades flash from every direction, tearing through imperial fabric and mortal flesh simultaneously. Blood arcs across pristine marble in crimson constellations. The chamber transforms into a frenzy not of righteous execution, but collective madness, each conspirator stabbing repeatedly, as if the number of wounds might somehow justify their actions, each thrust an attempt to butcher their own doubts. Caesar spins, wounded but defiant, eyes flashing with the same fierce intelligence that conquered Gaul, that crossed the Rubicon, that reimagined Rome itself. He tries to stand, dignity intact even as his lifeblood drains, but the conspirators swarm like carrion birds, each name he once trusted now, delivering another wound. And then Brutus steps forward, dagger glinting wetly in the chamber light. Caesar sees him and freezes. In that suspended heartbeat, all sound vanishes, all motion ceases, the moment crystallizing around that single devastating recognition. No theatrical cry of betrayal crosses Caesar's lips, no curse upon future generations. Only the soft, choked Latin whisper, "Et tu, Brute?" Not accusation, but profound grief, the sound of absolute trust shattered beyond repair. The final thrust lands, not the deepest wound, but the mortal one. As Caesar crumples at the feet of Pompey's statue, his blood seeping between white marble tiles, his body pierced 23 times, the Republic dies not with triumphal proclamation, but with a silence that will echo through centuries to come. The chamber stills. Dagger tips drip crimson onto marble, each drop echoing like a water clock counting the moments after irreversible history. Senators retreat, their hands trembling not with the exertion of murder, but with the crushing weight of consequence they cannot yet comprehend. Pompey's stone eyes gaze down upon the crumpled form of his greatest rival, blood seeping between cracks in the marble floor, pooling beneath the very statue erected to honor the man Caesar had defeated. Brutus stands transfixed, his blade hanging uselessly from nerveless fingers, as if the connection between will and flesh has been severed along with Caesar's life. Around him, conspirators begin their frantic chorus of justification, voices rising with hollow reassurances about liberty restored and tyranny defeated, as if mere words could rewrite the brutal tableau before them. But beneath their proclamations, a terrible silence spreads like poison, smothering their righteousness. Beyond these walls, Rome continues its morning rhythms, citizens haggling in markets, children playing in streets, all unaware that their world has just fractured beyond repair. The assassins move toward daylight, leaving crimson footprints that trace their path like an accusation, blood filling the grooves of their sandals, with stains no water will ever purify. And Brutus, heir to the Republic's most sacred traditions, cannot control the violent tremors in his hands. Not from remorse, not yet, but from the terrible coldness radiating outward from his core, as if some essential flame of humanity has been extinguished with Caesar's last breath, leaving only a frozen void where certainty once lived. News surges through Rome like fire through a parched woodland, consuming reason, igniting passion. The whispers leap from patrician mouth to plebeian ear, gathering force with each retelling, "Caesar is dead, Caesar is dead." In markets, citizens fall to their knees weeping, while others raise cups in furtive celebration, the city fracturing along invisible fault lines of allegiance. The eternal city, forged in centuries of iron certainty, now trembles on its 7 hills. Mark Antony receives the news with a terrible stillness, his face hardening into the marble mask of retribution. Standing over Caesar's mutilated corpse, his grief transforms into cold calculation, fingers tracing the wounds as if memorizing each betrayal, mind cataloging armies, coffers, and names. His whispered oath of vengeance carries more weight than all the conspirators' lofty proclamations. Brutus moves through Rome's streets as if walking between worlds, his name both celebrated and cursed in the same breath. Citizens reach to touch his blood-stained toga, uncertain whether they grasp the hand of savior or villain. He answers their questions with republican platitudes that ring hollow even to his own ears. That night, alone in his chamber, the carefully constructed justifications crumble away. In fitful sleep, he sees not the reborn republic but Caesar's eyes in that final moment, filled not with imperial rage, but with the wounded bewilderment of a father betrayed by his favorite son. He wakes, clutching at air those words, et tu, Brute, clinging to him like a fever, not historical footnote, but eternal indictment. The daggers freed Rome from a tyrant, but chained Brutus to an unforgivable act. The Republic stands restored on parchment and proclamation, while its soul bleeds out through 23 wounds. What the conspirators cannot yet see, but history already knows, is that their blades severed not just Caesar's life, but the last thread of Republican pretense, opening the door for empires built on bones and betrayal, where loyalty dies first and friends become the deadliest weapons of all. At Caesar's funeral, the final rupture ignites. Mark Antony ascends before the assembled masses, his face a battleground of raw grief and calculated fury. Standing beside Caesar's mutilated body, he unfurls the blood-crusted toga for all to witness, his voice never shouting yet penetrating deeper than any battle cry could reach. Each stab wound he catalogues with devastating precision, not just as tears in cloth, but as betrayals of flesh, naming the hand that delivered each blow, lingering longest on Brutus's strike. When he reveals Caesar's will, his fingers tracing testament to Caesar's generosity, lands and treasures bequeathed to these very citizens now weeping openly, something primal awakens in Rome. The crowd transforms from mourners to vengeful instrument, their collective grief crystallizing into unstoppable rage. They surge through streets with torches and iron, hunting conspirators house by house, their Republican saviors now marked for slaughter. Across Italy, Brutus flees physically but finds no escape mentally, Caesar's dying eyes following him through fevered nights, that whispered question haunting every dream. At Philippi, surrounded by Antony's legions, Brutus realizes his final opponent was never Rome's armies, but Caesar's ghost standing beside every standard, watching from every helmet. As he turns his sword upon himself, blood flowing between his fingers as Caesar's head, his last conscious thought is not of the republic he failed to save, but of Caesar's gaze, still asking what no answer could ever satisfy. Meanwhile, young Octavian watches, absorbs, calculates, fashioning from this bloodshed not a restored republic, but an empire built on the certainty that mercy creates vulnerability, that trust invites the blade. The assassination's true legacy becomes clear as centuries unfold, not in republican revival, but in paranoid emperors sleeping among bodyguards, in power maintained through fear rather than law. Rome's greatest wound was self-inflicted, its republican dream not conquered by barbarians, but murdered by its most devoted sons, teaching future generations that civilization's greatest threat comes not from enemies storming gates, but from guardians who kill what they love in desperate attempts to preserve it. The marble floor, once slick with Caesar's blood, now lies ossified beneath centuries of story and dust, yet the echoes have never truly faded. In dim halls of power, where men still whisper promises they cannot keep and clasp hands already reaching for knives, Caesar and Brutus remain, not as mere historical figures, but as embodiments of humanity's eternal struggle. We remember the 23 wounds not for their number, but for what they truly destroyed. Not merely a man, not even a republic, but something far more precious, the faith that binds civilization together. The belief that friendship could withstand the corrupting force of power, that virtue could restrain raw ambition, that Rome could ascend without sacrificing its very soul. The most haunting legacy lies not in political transformation, but in that frozen moment of recognition between betrayer and betrayed. Caesar's eyes widening not in fear of death, but in the visceral agony of understanding that his life would end at the hands of those he cherished most deeply. This is the legacy that echoes through corridors of time, impossible to silence. Long after legions have crumbled to dust, marble temples collapsed into rubble, and mighty empires rotted into mere memory, we return obsessively to that blood-soaked chamber, to that final labored breath, to that devastating question suspended forever in time. Et tu, Brute? We return because in this moment we glimpse ourselves with terrifying clarity in the trust we extend to others, in the betrayals we secretly fear, in our capacity for both loyalty and treachery. 23 times his flesh was pierced, yet it is the final wound, the one delivered by a friend, that continues to bleed inside every human heart, capable of both love and betrayal. So we end where we began, with a truth inscribed in blood and marble. The greatest danger to power lies not in enemies who despise, but in friends who once cherished. Brutus and Caesar transcend ancient figures. They stand as eternal sentinels at civilization's crossroads, reminders that every empire carries within it the instruments of its own destruction, that behind every crown lies a vulnerable human heart. Their shadow falls across every chamber of governance, every pact sealed with promises, every alliance formed with embraces. In presidential offices, parliament halls, and corporate boardrooms, their ghosts linger unseen yet ever present, not merely as historical footnote, but as perpetual warning. Those fatal words, et tu, Brute, echo not as mere theatrical device, but as civilization's most haunting question, suspended across time. Who stands beside us now, eyes warm with apparent devotion, hands steady with seeming loyalty, who might one day deliver the fatal stroke? And when that blade falls, will it truly serve freedom, or merely fear dressed as virtue? The answer resides not in scholarly tomes, but in that treacherous space where trust collides with ambition, where friendship fractures against power, where the chambers of human hearts still pulse with the same blood that once pooled beneath a tyrant's broken body and a republic's shattered dream. And yet, it endures. Not the republic, not even the empire it birthed, but the story. The ache of betrayal immortalized not through triumph, but through suffering, through that anguished, whispered question made eternal. Every generation rediscovers Brutus and Caesar, not with academic detachment, but with visceral recognition, because their story pulses within our collective veins. We stand at their crossroads when we must choose between loyalty and conscience, safety and sacrifice, truth and allegiance. Their tragedy becomes ours, not because we wield daggers, but because we too inhabit chambers where trust and ambition collide, where ideals shatter against personal bonds. We see ourselves in Caesar, convinced of our righteous path even as danger encircles us, blind to betrayal cloaked as friendship. We see ourselves in Brutus, believing sacrifice justifies any means, only to discover too late that purity of intention cannot wash away blood once spilled. That is why this tale endures, not as distant history, but as living reflection, a mirror showing what we are capable of in our finest and most terrible moments. One man reached for immortality through power, another for immortality through principle, and in the crimson space between them, civilization itself was transfigured. A tu brute, these words linger not merely as Caesar's final breath, but as humanity's eternal question, whispering through corridors of power wherever friendship fractures against ambition, wherever love and betrayal share the same face. And so the final image is not Caesar's bloodied corpse or Brutus's trembling dagger, but a crown untouched, lying abandoned among marble dust and silence, a symbol both of what could have been and what could never be again. The Republic did not die with a scream or a flourish, but with a whispered question between friends, a sacred bond shattered in service of a dream warped into nightmare. Julius Caesar lies still, but his shadow lengthens through centuries, rising in every throne claimed through fear, every alliance sacrificed for the illusion of duty, every government built upon the burial ground of noble ideals, and in every loyal hand concealing a blade, in every well-meaning patriot convinced their cause justifies unthinkable betrayal. Brutus endures. Their presence lingers in the air of every chamber where power is spoken of as birthright, rather than sacred trust, where friendship becomes the deadliest weapon of all. History remembers what the soul cannot forget, that it was not the 22 wounds from enemies that destroyed the Republic, but the 23rd from a beloved son, driven by terrible conviction, preserved in memory not as triumph, but as civilization's most haunting failure, captured in those 3 devastating words that echo through eternity. Et tu, brute? That whisper has never truly faded. It resounds in every moment when trust is weaponized, when ideals are sacrificed at the altar of expedience. In parliamentary chambers and corporate boardrooms, in marriages and friendships, wherever power and intimacy intertwine, Caesar's ghost turns his wounded gaze, and Brutus's hands tremble anew. For beneath the marble grandeur of the assassination lies a visceral truth. Betrayal can exist only where love once flourished. The blade that cuts deepest is always wielded by the hand we never thought to fear. The saga of Caesar and Brutus transcends mere historical account, becoming instead an eternal warning pulsing through human consciousness. In our world, still driven by naked ambition, where democracies fracture from within, where loyalty shifts with political winds, we inherit their blood-soaked lesson, not as distant academic exercise, but as lived human experience. The final epitaph stands not carved in cold stone, but seared into our collective soul. The greatest danger lies not in the enemy who declares himself, but in the friend whose embrace conceals the sharpened edge of righteous conviction. In the end, there are no heroes, only choices that unravel into consequences no man can fully foresee. The betrayal of Julius Caesar by Brutus endures not because it resolved the conflict between tyranny and liberty, but because it revealed the terrible price of attempting both simultaneously. We return to this story, not for answers, but for the mirror it holds to our own souls, forcing us to confront what we might sacrifice in the name of principle. The assassination stands as a visceral warning across time, compelling us to ask what conviction truly costs when blood stains our righteousness. In that ancient chamber where friendship splintered into daggers, we witnessed the collapse of every boundary between love and betrayal, loyalty and ambition, salvation and destruction. The true wound was never the blade itself, but the recognition in Caesar's eyes as he beheld the one person he never thought capable of harm. This is why the story continues to haunt civilization, pulsing beneath every oath of allegiance, every whispered conspiracy, every moment when principle and personal bond collide. As long as power seduces and loyalty binds, as long as human hearts harbor both devotion and doubt, that whispered question will echo through history's corridors, et tu, Brute, and someone we believed incorruptible will answer with the terrible silence of steel. And so, the blade becomes more than instrument of death, a terrible reflection of the human heart divided against itself. Here lies the naked truth no historian can soften, that republics die not from external conquest, but internal fracture, when virtue becomes a justification for violence. The Senate chamber, once vibrating with passionate debate, stands hollowed by silence, its marble grandeur masking its spiritual collapse. Between Caesar and Brutus unfolds civilization's most profound tragedy, not merely of men but of ideals corrupted by their own defenders. Power cloaked as public service, betrayal masked as patriotic duty, friendship transformed into calculated sacrifice, all converge in that blood-soaked moment when daggers pierce not just flesh, but the very covenant binding citizens together. This story burns in our collective memory because it reveals our deepest contradiction, that our greatest strength, our capacity for devoted loyalty, contains within it the seeds of our most devastating betrayals. The blade falls, and with it shatters not just a man's life, but the illusion that principles alone can guide us through the labyrinth of power. This remains the terrible inheritance of that March day, as permanent as the marble that witnessed it, as haunting as those final words that will echo through eternity. Et tu, Brute? That eternal whisper, carried on the breath of centuries, does not fade with time, but deepens into civilization's marrow. Et tu, Brute resonates not as historical curiosity, but as perpetual warning, a mirror reflecting our own capacity for betrayal in the name of righteousness. In it lives the terrible knowledge that ideals alone cannot shield us from treachery, that love without vigilance invites ruin, that every republic balances on the fragile architecture of human hearts. Rome's true downfall came not when Caesar's body collapsed, but when trust died in his gaze, when Brutus transformed conviction into cruelty with a single thrust. This is the cost carved into history's flesh. As empires rise, crumble, and resurrect, we remember not the laws enacted or territories conquered, but the silhouette of a friend stepping forward with trembling resolve, blade in hand, and the devastating silence that follows. In that silence echoes not merely Rome's collapse, but the fracturing of something sacred in every human soul, a betrayal that transcends time to haunt our own chambers of power, our own intimate trusts, our own moral certainties.